of politics too. There's the Observer, sack Boris for shaming our nation, Corbyn tells the PM. Perhaps no great surprise there, but that was the story you heard in our news as well. Sunday Times splash, Tory turmoil as 40 MPs say that May must go. Now, the crucial thing to remember is that you need 48 Tory MPs to sign a letter to trigger a leadership challenge, but nonetheless, that's quite a lot. The Sunday Telegraph has Michael Gove on the front page, my plan for a green Brexit revolution. We're going to be talking much more about that later in the programme. And the Sunday Express taking another take on the same sort of story, rebirth of UK fishing ports, it says. Brexit will net £3 billion extra when we take back control of the seas, mainly for the communities around the coast, which have had such a hard time. And then finally, Michael Gove again on the Mail on Sunday front page, Boris and Gove plot to hijack number 10. What can that all be about? We will find out more later on. But let's start, James, if we may, with Boris Johnson. You spent a lot of time tracking him around. He's not had a great morning this morning. Not surprising, I suppose, that Jeremy Corbyn wants him to go, but it's a difficult weekend for him.
It's not surprising, but what puzzles me about this is why it's taken Labour so long to come round to targeting Boris Johnson politically. I mean, you know, there's the latest case that this has been pegged on, namely the
Gary Radcliffe case.
The Gary Radcliffe case and the Foreign Secretary's mistaken claims that he made in evidence to a parliamentary committee last week that somehow she was training journalists when her family had made it very, very clear that actually she was in Iran on holiday. But Labour have taken some time to get round to targeting him on this. The Sunday Telegraph is also reporting that they think that Boris Johnson might now formally correct what he actually said to that committee to try and correct this. I think the thing that we're missing here is that, yes, there's a political row around this particular case, but the future of Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe is not going to be determined by words given to a parliamentary committee. There are an awful lot of huge internal political situations.
Can I ask you about the distinction between the Iranian government, and Boris Johnson says that he's spoken to his opposite number in the Iranian government on the one hand, and the judiciary and the state media on the other?
Yeah, they're totally separate. And Boris Johnson has indeed spoken to the foreign minister, Zarif, last week, and Zarif has said, I will go and make my views known to the judiciary. He's also said that in his words, what Boris Johnson said has had no impact on this particular case. The point is, Mr. Zarif is only one player in this game. The Revolutionary Guard and the judiciary have their own views and their own agenda. And that, I think, is the bigger picture than just the Westminster attacks on the...
Gabby, these political scandals come and go. How serious is this one, do you think?
I think it's serious because there are such, direct human consequences for a woman who's sitting in prison, separated from her child who's growing up without her. And that brings it home to people who wouldn't necessarily be interested in a bit of sort of to and fro at Westminster. And it's also because it comes, if Boris had made one mistake in a career of, sort of playing by the rules, it would be manageable. But it just feels like it adds to something we already know about Boris, which is a bit careless, a bit slapdash, isn't doing the homework, and it plays into that sense of, do you really want this person as your foreign secretary?
I was just saying, what puzzles people is he hasn't done that much to correct it. He could have said, I made a complete mistake, I misspoke, this is what I meant to say. He hasn't been as explicit as that.
Camilla, let's turn to the Mail on Sunday, your rival paper there, you've very generously started with, and it's got Boris and Michael Gove there, arm in arm as allies.
Indeed, Michael Gove, the man of the moment, and of course he'll be in this studio and you'll be asking him all about that too. And it's not just, Gove isn't just in the Mail on Sunday, but in this particular context, it's whether he and Boris are teaming up in what the Mail on Sunday describes, interestingly, as a hard Brexit cell, as if somehow they're going to get together and start waterboarding Remainers on the cabinet. And the point here is that they've written to the Prime Minister, obviously urging her to take a hard Brexit, in inverted commas, stance. The Mail on Sunday doesn't seem to like this. In a leader, it says, this is absolute arrogance in extremis. Why are they putting the Prime Minister under this undue pressure? This is some sort of axis of evil. Of course, it could be described as cabinet democracy.
Indeed,
and two people expressing their own view about the direction of travel for the negotiations.
Putting to one side that the headlines and the exclamation marks and so forth. This memo is interesting to the extent that it says there are parts of government which are not preparing properly for Brexit.
Yes, and I think also they want to reaffirm this notion that we are preparing for a no deal, because they see that as a key plank of the negotiation. The only way it's going to work is to threaten to just leave, and that's obviously something that's been argued heavily by Brexiters. Equally, I think it's of interest, and again, perhaps you want to ask Mr Gove about this later, the notion of Boris and Gove now reunited. Of course, we all remember the treachery that occurred when Gove stood for the leadership to Boris's great shock and surprise. They appear to have buried the hatchet, and it's quite a formidable duo, and I think that's what people are going to be now looking at, and their supremacy in the cabinet that at a time when Theresa May is at her most vulnerable.
Very interesting. Camilla, can I take you straight on then to the Sunday Telegraph story, the other Gove story?
Well,
My plan for a green Brexit revolution.
Man of the moment he is, because he's done this op-ed in the Telegraph, basically saying, and of course it's a key criticism, isn't it, of Brexit. It seems to be somehow aligned, Brexit, with climate change denial and this notion that as soon as we leave, we're going to be dispensing with all of the good things the EU have done with environmentalism. Gove is saying certainly not. The EU Commission's role as the watchdog for environmental concerns is going to be taken away from Britain. He wants to set up an independent body to oversee the fact that, yes, with the EU withdrawal bill, we're going to be absorbing back into our legislation all of the EU initiatives that have been good for the environment. But on top of that, he also wants this oversight body making sure that the government are doing things right, which of course will appeal to the left. We've done a story in our paper as well about Gove's increased leadership chances on the back of
Swampy Gove, we can call
Swampy Gove suddenly being a darling of the left. Who would have thought it?
Gabby, one of the things that happens if you're Prime Minister on a Sunday morning is you get lots and lots of helpful advice in the newspapers, and you've got a piece there by Sir Craig Oliver, who used to advise David Cameron.
Indeed, and his piece of helpful advice for Theresa May, who's, as you say, not short of it, is that if she wants to get herself out of this hole, what she has to do is get out of the number 10 bunker and embrace a chaotic world. He thinks that she should stop cowering inside number 10, being bullied by her cabinet, and get out and talk to people directly and tell them something that they probably don't want to hear, which is that Brexit is going to cost a lot of money, and that various other stuff, what he describes as being the realist among the dreamers, various other hard truths about the positive downsides, the fact that it's going to take longer than you think, that we really need a transition period, and we may not get a free trade deal instantly. Now, you're reading this piece, you think, for another Prime Minister, that could work. The idea that you appeal over the heads of your cabinet to the voters with whom you're still popular. I mean, still 40% in the polls or whatever it is. You just feel Theresa May's natural strength is not her people skills. And if she could go out and do that, she wouldn't be in the problem.
Also, I think if you're a Prime Minister in a slightly weak position, being told to go out and make yourself a little more unpopular isn't necessarily the best advice.
In for a penny, in for a pound, I suppose.
James.
If you talk to MPs, some of them say, look, yes, you could ask for that, and you know there are lots of MPs rushing around saying we need to be thinking about what the Tory party should be doing in 5-10 years hence. Most of them just say, look, we just want some basic competence. We just want some basic sense of actually, you know, what's the one job for government at the moment? It's Brexit. Let's actually show that we have some ideas on that. The one thing about that piece actually by Craig Oliver is I've never seen a water ship metaphor stretched to existence. Stormy waters, leaky ship, sinking ship, walk the plank, every cliche.
Everything's
all there.
Fantastic.
Masterful.
Let's move on to another story, very importantly, the 40 MPs saying that Theresa May must go, all over the front page of the Sunday Times, Gabby.
Yes, and as you said, obviously 40 MPs is not 48 MPs, which is the threshold needed to trigger a leadership contest, but it's uncomfortably close. And the question now is whether we've reached the point, and what's held Tory MPs back until now is the fear, firstly, that it's not obvious who the brilliant, there's not some perfect candidate waiting in the wings, and secondly, a replacement Prime Minister would really hasten demands for an election, and nobody wants an election, or Tories don't want an election right now. But what this piece is saying is that really we may have come to a point where the greater worry is that Theresa May just cannot negotiate Brexit, that she is too compromised, that the EU is looking at her saying, you may not even be here in 6 months, so what is the point of negotiating with you? We can't even go do a deal. And that is accelerating the revolt.
But this is also, Camilla, about ideas and refreshing Tory ideas. There's a story in the Sunday Telegraph. Before we get to it, I just want to ask you one thing. I've noticed over the last few weeks and months that the Sunday Express, your paper, is putting politics much more often on the front page than it used to it. It's politics, 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 which is not what we used to get from the Sunday Express. Why?
Well, to be fair, we've always splashed on hard news stories. I know the Daily sometimes associated with health stories. We've always gone for the news of the week. Politics is selling for us, and that's really good. And I think we always do the kind of Sunday lunch test when we think about what we're going to splash on. What are people talking about? And I think our readers have felt vindicated by the Brexit vote and want to read more about it. Fisheries is a particularly emblematic story, which is why we put it on the front today.
Well, let's just quickly talk about this story. This is the idea of a revived Thatcher revolution.
Yeah, it's not on there, actually. I'm just trying to find it here. Here we are.
Yep.
So this is Lord Saatchi and Graham Brady, the head of the 1922 committee's new generation project, and this is obviously to take on the Corbynistas and try and repopularise Toryism among younger people and the millennials. It makes the point here that actually the Conservatives have lost some of the key arguments of Thatcherism, perhaps in an attempt to be a bit more Labour light in order to appeal to younger people. And what's interesting here is he's basically saying, they're both saying, go back to Thatcherite principles, be unashamedly conservative, but with some compassion. What's also of note is the fact that Amber Rudd will be giving the keynote speech, which might raise eyebrows with some.
I've got a vast list of stories to cover still here. We've got 1.5 minutes left, so we have to be very, very quick. James, can I ask you about Northern Ireland? That is another really, really important, hard-edged political story today. Really
important story, which hasn't been sorted yet. What I thought was really interesting in this piece in The Observer is just the scale of the robustness of the briefing that the EU... We always forget that we kind of think that this is just only the Brits brief. Actually, the Europeans brief very hard. And there's one fantastic quote here where a senior EU official is quoted as saying, my impression is that this issue of Northern Ireland isn't a priority from the UK. I mean, if I was a UK negotiator, I'd find that deeply offensive. There's also an amazing quote here from Andrew Duff, an incredibly powerful pro-European MEP, who accuses, saying Britain is experiencing a kind of Weimar collapse, which is overstatement to say the least.
Absolutely. There is a lot of very aggressive briefing coming from Brussels, though. We shouldn't forget that. Finally, an issue we haven't talked about at all today, Gabby, the NHS.
Yes, we're obviously a week and a half away from the budget, which normally would be dominating conversation in politics by now. And this is a piece in The Observer talking about the pressure on Philip Hammond to produce more money from nowhere for the NHS in the budget. We're looking at long waits in A&E up by more than 500% since 2010, but also making clear that he's being asked to find money for the NHS, billions for housing, sort out the mess for universal credit, you know, probably cure cancer and deliver world peace at the same time. There is an awful lot resting on this budget.
Time is up. Thank you all very much indeed. That was a really